At a conference held in Singapore, the United States Secretary of Defense made a statement that caught the attention of international analysts and reinforced the tension in the Indo-Pacific. He stated that American troops are being strategically repositioned in South Korea and Japan for a double goal: to contain the growing threat of North Korea and especially to prepare a response to a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan Island. This U.S. military movement is seen by many as a direct warning to Beijing, making it clear that Washington is willing to defend his interests in the region. Today, there are approximately 28,000 American soldiers parked in South Korea. Officially, this contingent has the mission to protect the ally against a possible attack from North Korea. But behind the scenes, sources linked to the U.S. Department of Defense confirm that these troops could be quickly mobilized to work in a conflict scenario involving Taiwan. This possibility has generated tensions with the South Korean government itself, which historically avoids getting involved in direct disputes between China and the United States. While South Korea benefits from American protection, on the other, it fears becoming a target in a war that has not chosen. Meanwhile, China, led by Xi Jinping, has significantly increasing its military actions around Taiwan. Beijing set aside the diplomatic rhetoric and began to invest in force demonstrations. Chinese fighters have crossed the median line of Taiwan's narrow, often increasing. Warships perform exercises near the island and sometimes simulate naval blocks. These actions make it clear that the idea of reunification with Taiwan is, for Xi Jinping, a national priority, and that the option for the use of force is not discarded. Taiwan, in turn, tries to protect himself as he can. The Taiwanese government has strengthened its relations with the United States, as well as seeking support from other allies in the region, such as Japan and Australia. However, there is a growing fear within the island to become a currency of exchange amidst economic negotiations between Washington and Beijing. Some analysts say that if the United States consider a tariff agreement with China more advantageous, Taiwan could end up sacrificed in the name of commercial interests. This scenario, although unlikely, is not totally discarded. Even with signs of tension and the possibility of direct conflict, military strategy experts believe that China would hardly begin war with a total offensive. Most likely, according to these analysts, Beijing begins hostilities with indirect measures: economic blocks, cyber attacks, sabotage of critical infrastructure, and misinformation campaigns. This type of hybrid war is already part of the Chinese primer and has been successfully used in other regions of the world. Taiwan knows this and has invested in cyber defenses and quick response systems. While the climate of uncertainty grows, the United States is still expanding its military presence in the region. The Pentagon reinforced bases in Okinawa, Japan, and reorganized strategic units in South Korea, preparing the land for a possible response to a Chinese investment against Taiwan. According to the Secretary of Defense, these movements are not only defensive. They are part of an active stance to ensure stability and freedom of navigation in one of the most vital regions on the planet. The message is given: the U.S. does not intend to passively watch an attack on the island. But the question that remains is, how does China really want to take Taiwan? What would be the military strategy employed by Beijing if you decide to start a war? And how is Taiwan preparing to resist this real and growing threat? If China decides to start a total invasion of Taiwan, the plan would involve a combination of brute strength, technological superiority, and siege strategies. The first step would probably be a massive air and naval attack on strategic targets on the island: radars, air defense systems, military bases, communication stations, and critical civil infrastructure, such as energy plants and logistics centers. This initial attack aimed to paralyze Taiwan's response capacity in the early hours of the conflict and pave the way for a complete siege of the island. Then China would use its naval power to establish a sea block around Taiwan. Submarines, counterpettiers, and Chinese aircraft carrier would surround the island to prevent the arrival of reinforcements and supplies from abroad. At the same time, landing vessels and mobile floating structures would be mobilized to carry troops, armored vehicles, and artillery. China has invested heavily in amphibious forces in recent years precisely for this type of operation. The beaches of west of Taiwan, which are more flat and accessible, would be the preferred points for landing. But such an operation would not be simple. Taiwan has been preparing quietly and determined. The island has strengthened its defensive infrastructure, installing mobile air defense systems and creating bunkers networks in mountainous regions. These underground bunkers would act as alternative command centers if the main bases were destroyed. The Taiwanese army also developed urban guerrilla plans, with the civilian population being trained to resist in case of occupation. The doctrine is clear. If there is invasion, the struggle will continue on the streets, tunnels, and even in the mountains. In addition, Taiwan has been making major investments in anti-Viking missiles and surveillance drones. The goal is to make the most difficult to approach Chinese forces and make any attempt to disembark a logistical nightmare for Beijing. Another important point is Taiwan Strait. The waters are agitated and dangerous, which makes it difficult to cross large military vessels. A storm or calculation error can compromise an entire operation. Beijing knows this, so any offensive would have to be meticulously planned and executed in a favorable climate window. In this scenario, the United States would play a key role. A rapid and effective response would mainly come from the military bases in Okinawa, Japan, and those already established in South Korea. The first U.S. action would be to break the Chinese naval blockade, opening Taiwan's supply and support corridors. Fighters, submarines, and warships would be sent to the conflict zone, and U.S. forces would try to establish an aerial superiority on the Narrow. All this, however, would involve a very high risk of direct confrontation with the Popular Army of China. Another factor that can change balance is the regional allies. Japan, Australia, Philippines, and even India observe the crisis unfolding carefully. A total conflict in the Taiwan Strait would affect essential trade routes, damaging the entire Asian economy. Therefore, there are those who believe that a coalition of countries could graduate in support of Taiwan if China exceeds the point of non-return. The Indo-Pacific is today the center of gravity of global trade, and a war there would have devastating effects for everyone involved, even for those who are not directly on the battlefield. Nevertheless, there is an unpredictable element: time. Each passing day, China advances in military capacity, and Taiwan tries to compensate for alliances and defensive innovation. The equilibrium point is fragile. A poorly interpreted provocation, a military exercise that escapes control, or even a strategic calculation error can light the trigger for a conflict that no one really wants, but for which everyone is already preparing. If the war really begins, it won't just be Taiwan and China in the center of the crossfire. The whole world will feel the effects. The global economy, which strongly depends on the production of Taiwanese semiconductors, would be one of the first to be reached. Taiwan concentrates about 60% of the worldwide capacity to make advanced chips, and an interruption in these production chains would cause an unprecedented technological crisis. Whole industries, from automobiles to smartphones, would stop almost instantly. Western companies, especially in the United States and Europe, would collapse logistics. This would make the war quickly stop being just a territorial dispute and become an economic crisis of global proportions. In the battlefield, Taiwan bets on a doctrine called porco spine. The idea is simple: turning the island into something so difficult, expensive, and painful to conquer that China thinks twice before trying. For this, the country has developed asymmetrical weapons such as naval mines, portable missiles, kamikaze drones, and electronic traps. In addition, troop training has been focused on prolonged urban resistance. Each city, each street, each building can become a point of confrontation. The war would no longer be a simple invasion and would become prolonged with huge losses to the invader. On the other hand, China bets on speed. The Chinese plan, if executed, would depend on a fulminant attack, with rapid occupation of the island's main strategic points. Beijing knows that the more time pass after the first attack, the greater the chances of American intervention and allies. Therefore, the action window for China would be short. A calculation error, a logistical delay, or a harder resistance than expected could turn the tide quickly. This is Xi Jinping's great military dilemma: the decision between acting fast and taking risks, or waiting more and facing an even more prepared defense. South Korea, in this board, is in a delicate position. Despite being a U.S. ally, the country has strong economic ties with China. If American troops parked in the country are mobilized against Beijing, Seoul will inevitably be dragged to the conflict. This could light other focuses of tension, especially with North Korea, which could use the moment to launch offensive or further press the region. The Korean peninsula, therefore, would also become a critical point. A calculation error on any side can make the conflict spread far beyond the Taiwan Strait. In Japan, the population has already experienced an increase in tension. With the presence of U.S. military bases, especially in Okinawa, the archipelago knows it would be one of the first targets of Chinese retaliation in the event of war. Therefore, Japan has increased its expenses with defense and revised its pacifist policies. A conflict between China and Taiwan with American involvement would push Japan to active military stance, something that has not been seen since World War II. This would mark a historical change in Asian geopolitics and rekindle deep trauma throughout the region. In the end, the scenario that is drawn is that of a barrel of gunpowder with several dulls lit. Rhetoric is increasingly aggressive, increasingly bold military movements, and increasing risks. Meanwhile, Taiwan follows a vibrant democracy, trying to maintain his identity, autonomy, and security in the midst of a geopolitical storm that grows every week. The island refuses to bow and shows the world that it is willing to resist, even if it means facing the largest military power in Asia. What is at stake is not just Taiwan's future. It is the stability of an entire region. It is the balance of global power. It is the survival of small democracies in the face of superpowers that are imposed by force. And at this decisive moment, any wrong gesture, any suspicious silence, or any hesitation can be very expensive. The world observes, tense, what will come next.